one day leave its hole and get the cheese. You cannot give up just yet. Frisk, the wind is stay determined, filled with determination. But it refused.
Determination, back in the days of Undertale, was essential to understanding the story of the game. It's what makes human souls so much more powerful than monster kinds, both lore-wise and metatextually. It gives human souls the ability to persist after death, that determination to keep living. It allows us to save and load. It's what allowed Flowey to save and load. It's the reason we pushed through to the ending, whichever one we chose to get. We were determined to save everyone, to save ourselves, or exterminate the underground. And so we did. Human, I remember your genocides or whatever. Beautiful story, absolute masterpiece of writing from the genius Toby Fox himself. There it is. Come 2018 and the release of Deltarune Chapter 1. We became absorbed in the new story Toby had for us and the Chris is possessed by Kara and is going to murder everyone theories. In this new world, there seemed to be no place for determination. The Red Soul was just that, a soul. Nothing more than a shared mechanic, visual, and concept from Undertale, even though there was something weird going on with it. Oh well, I'm sure that won't be important to the larger story later. But regardless, there wasn't any trace of that familiar determination, having been scrubbed clean from save point flavor text and background lore. And that was that. It was a new story with new ideas. But then Chapter 2 released in 2021, and suddenly...
If only we had a way to make more darkness, we might be able to cover the whole world. That is when I realized, this power of the will, this power of determination, is this not something that all Lightners possess? If one was simply determined enough, could not anyone make a dark fountain? So then, if the night has taken its leave, then I will simply make a new one.
Tricky Tony tricked us yet again. Determination is back, it's relevant, and apparently it's something all Lightners have, not just humans anymore. It's an essential component of creating a dark fountain, and likely synonymous with the fountain creator's will that shapes the dark world around it. And I think it's the key to understanding how darkness works and the Roaring Night itself. I'm going to come right out and say it, this is not a theory explaining what role determination plays logistically in Deltarune, because I simply don't think we have enough evidence to nail something exact down. But I do want to use determination as a thematic jumping point. I'm certain this is not a theory unique to me, there's probably several other videos just like it, but I have yet to see any that make all the same points I intend to and show all the same evidence. I do not claim to be unique, I just want to get my thoughts out there. This should go without saying, but Deltarune Chapters 1 through 4 spoilers ahead. If you haven't played Deltarune at all, or the new chapters, go do that and come back later. Unless you just don't care, in which case, okay. Another quick preface, I'm basing this theory under the assumption that Des is the Knight. I'm sure you've seen it floating around, but if you want a concise theory on it, here's a great one by Ninja Nick. Got it? Good. You're probably wondering why I bothered starting off the video with the whole discussion on Undertale's portrayal of determination. I thought this was a Deltarune video. Well, it is. It's because there are a million ways the powers of Deltarune's darkness parallel it. I'm not saying determination and darkness are the same thing, but I definitely don't think the connections are accidental. There's just too many for it not to be important to the main story. We're going to start in Undertale's Pacifist Root exclusive True Lab, which is where we actually get the majority of the information we have on determination, and where we witness firsthand the horrifying effects it can have on monsters. For those of you who need a refresher, Alphys tells us both directly and through her log entries that determination is a substance that can be extracted from a human soul, and, as I mentioned before, is what gives them the ability to persist after death. She injects this into several deceased monster bodies who have yet to turn into dust, hoping to give this power of persistence to their souls, but instead revives the monsters. Tragically and horrifically, their bodies can't sustain the determination for long. This is because monster bodies are made more of magic than of physical matter, unlike humans. As a result, the monsters injected with determination begin melting together to sustain the amount of determination they have, creating the haunting creatures known as the Amalgamates. Chiron's sister becomes Lemon Bread, Snowy the Snowdrake's mom becomes, well, actually nameless, but this is her, and a member of the dog pack becomes Endogeny. They're alive, yes, but zombie-like, amorphous, and warped versions of their former selves, with only fractions of their memories, lives, and characters remaining. All the Amalgamates are completely monochrome in both their overworld sprites and battle sprites, unlike everything else in Undertale. This trait is shared with portrayals of deepest darkness in Deltarune. Fountains opening, the Titans and Titan spawn, these weird little ball things, and the actual roaring night are purely black and white. Although sometimes there's a few other colors mixed in, like red, blue, or purple, generally it's still very black and white. Keep this in mind for later. These amalgamates can actually be found in Deltarune as well, though they're not in the same form we see them in Undertale. In Deltarune, without determination experiments, they're just dead. The gravestones of Shyren's sister Shyra, Snowy's mom Crystal, and the dog pack's former leader Mutler can all be found to the left of the church, with their dust-covered belongings buried beneath them. But what if I told you that isn't the only appearance of amalgamates in Deltarune? There's actually 2 other amalgamates that I didn't mention before because we still don't really know everything about them. Reaper Bird and Memory Head. Both of these 2 have had references to them hanging around subtly ever since Chapter 1. Reaper Birds is the easiest to spot, although it's actually a reference to an attack of theirs rather than their actual self. Everyman is this obscure, silly little guy who appears for a couple of their attacks, promptly to get his face mauled off by butterflies. Cute, right? He's not exclusive to this disturbing moment, however, as he actually appears 4 separate and seemingly unrelated times in Deltarune. In Jevel's carousel attack, Everyman's head has a chance of replacing one of the duck heads. In Queen's social media attack, Everyman has the chance of appearing as one of the side-scrolling profiles, not saying a word. In Pop-Up's attack, Everyman has a chance of appearing as a Pop-Up ad. Even in the light world, Everyman is lurking as graffiti in this alley. I'm gonna be honest, I'm not sure if he's anywhere in Chapters 3 and 4, but I would not be surprised. He's everywhere, and we don't really know why, but at the very least he's continually drawing your attention back to the true lab. Memory Head is more speculative, but there are still an odd number of connections. The mechanic to defeat Memory Heads is to use your cell phone, which is a recurring theme in Deltarune with Spamton, Gaster, and now Chris. Their attacks share many similarities with our good old Mystery Man sprite, which in turn shares literally everything with Deltarune. I don't feel the need to explain why. They can give you an item known as a bad memory, which actually harms you when you use it, as if it's trauma you're trying to suppress. Remind anyone else of Chris and the whole art therapy thing? If you want a cool, albeit slightly outdated, discussion on the memory heads, check out this video by Half-Bred Chaos. They go a lot more in depth than I do. That's not even mentioning the inherent connection of the true lab with the egg rooms. I mean, look at this dialogue. And of course, there's... Yeah. Clearly, we should not be ignoring the true lab before trying to understand the inner workings of Deltarune. But once again, this is not all. If all these other determination, true lab, and amalgamate references weren't enough, Chapter 3 slaps us in the face with it right at the start like a Spamton plush full of milk against a brick wall. Ralsei's opening explanation on how Dark Worlds work shows us our good old friend, image_friend. Now, I'm not even going to touch on friend because he's a bit too much of a hot topic for me. All you need to know is that he's heavily associated with Gaster, the Depths, Shadow Crystals, and most importantly, darkness itself. Here's an in-depth video on him by Spooky Dude. What makes his appearance here relevant to this discussion is how exactly he appears. The visuals accompanying Ralsei's explanation show friend inside a familiar amalgamate from Undertale, Endogeny. Endogeny? I was never really sure how it was supposed to be pronounced. Anyway, I think I screamed when it popped up the first time I played. This is right as Ralsei's explaining how things getting darker than dark warps our perspective and makes inanimate things seem to come to life. To me, it reads as very intentional to pair that detail with an amalgamate, to draw our attention yet again back to the true lab. It reads that darkness and determination shares the ability to reanimate the dead. But that's not even the only evidence here. I'm telling you, it's everywhere. Might I present the GOAT, the Hammer of Justice, Gerson, I'm Old Boon, or Chapter 4's Old Man. Gerson's dust was revived as a Darkner, patterned after the memory of his Lightner self, and that's not even speculation either. It's shown in the Light World when Susie stumbles upon his remains, it's told to us by Ralsei in the Second Sanctuary, it's displayed every way to Sunday that Dark Worlds have the ability to almost revive the dead. I say almost because that isn't really what it was doing. Darkners, as Ralsei spelled out for us in Chapter 3, are fictional after all. They're illusions of darkness. Gerson was dust in that glass case before the fountain was opened and remained that way after it closed, but that dusty hammer and glass was brought to life as a Darkner. Dark Worlds can bring back warped versions of the dead that can be life-accurate in the case of the Roaring Knights version of Gerson, or it can be eldritch facsimiles of the Lightner in question, shown by Susie's version. This one feels a bit less intentional at the moment, just based on what we have, but something else that's important here is the emphasis on memory. Ralsei pretty heavily implies that the reason Susie's Second Sanctuary version of Gerson was so messed up is because she didn't actually know Gerson when he was alive as a Lightner. She had no memory of the real Gerson for the fountain to manifest, which was necessary, since, as Ralsei says, he's a Darkner patterned after the memory of a Lightner. Susie's memory of Gerson was of a Darkner, which is why he comes out so zombified and, well, dark. This is also evidence for Death's Night, by the way. The old man takes on an extremely large teaching role in Chapter 4. Not only did the Roaring Knight know Gerson when he was alive, well enough to make a highly accurate Darkner of his memory, but they knew him as a teacher, just like Asriel and presumably Death did. Anyway, this ties back to the True Lab as well. The way to defeat all the Amalgamates, with the exception of Memory Head, is to remind them of who they used to be. You tell jokes to Snowy's mom to remind her of her son. You play fetch and pet Endogeny to remind him of his pack and doggish interests. And you hum to Lemon Bread to remind her of her and her sister's love of music, among a few other techniques for the generic monsters that are melded in with the main three. The way to return them to more conscious, less zombified states is to help them regain their lost memories. This is probably why Memory Head is even in the True Lab, since he definitely isn't a normal amalgamate. Unless he does have some deeper meta-significance regarding old Dr. Wingding. Like I said, this is a bit more obscure than the rest, but it's still worth pointing out that the life-likeness of determination/darkness revived characters is directly in line with memories. It's also worth noting that Gerson's gravestone is right next to those of the Undertale amalgamates, being the only one that isn't part of the True Lab. Kinda strange that they'd all be paired together, right? Almost like there's meant to be connections drawn between them. This brings us to Noelle's secret cousin, Rory Knight himself. Now the Knight is... unique, to say the least, based on what we know about them. First of all, they have to be at least mostly Lightner. But why? Well, because the Knight can not only leave Dark Worlds, as we see at the end of Chapter 3, but they don't just drop to the ground as an object. They're able to outrun Susie, all while actively kidnapping Undyne, who is not an easy target. Although they definitely seem more powerful than the average Lightner, they still are one on some fundamental level. Also, they can and do open fountains several times, which Queen pretty clearly establishes that only Lightners can do in her monologue. Otherwise, she would have just told Swatch to do it, or, I don't know, do it herself. King probably would have too, since he seemed all aboard the Knight's plan, or at least what he knew of it. I know, it's kinda hard to believe that this thing is a Lightner. I really don't think that they are entirely Lightner, because just look at that thing, man. It doesn't look anything like how Lightners do in the Dark World. It can fly, once again something we don't see happening at all with other Lightners. It's amorphous, being able to change and contort its shape at will. It has animalistic and zombie-like tendencies, drooling from the mouth while ragdolling, roaring, and splitting its ribcage open. They're completely black and white with a simple design, just an outline. Huh. Does that all remind you of something? Let's be clear though, as inhuman, or monster, as the Knight seems at times, they aren't completely mindless, an instinctive killing machine like the Titans seem to be. They're clearly decently intelligent, being able to plan, weigh consequences, and make decisions based on that, and even take cues from Chris to end their battle. The Knight even seems pretty cocky at times, almost like a punk teenager. Huh. It's Des, okay? The Knight's Des. But whatever, why does that matter to the discussion at hand? Well, I already pointed out the visual and behavioral similarities between the Knight and the Amalgamates, but there's actually more. Allow me to draw attention to a very important character in the determination discussion that I've been totally glossing over this whole time. Undyne the Undying, a monster so determined to stop you from eradicating monster kind that she literally brought herself back to life through that power. In the end, her body melts away, her own determination becoming too much for her body to handle. Gosh, she's so awesome. Aside from being freaking awesome sauce, she actually shares a lot of visual details with the Roaring Knight. As she's fighting to keep her body from turning to dust, her form goes staticky, a very similar effect to when you land a hit on the Knight. Maybe the Knight, too, is on the verge of death, keeping its body together through darkness, like Undyne did with determination. The color palette and designs match up like crazy, too. Now, before you run to the comments and say, Undertale battle sprites are always black and white and there's no overworld sprite for her, we can't know that. Shh. Take a look at her tarot card from the official Undertale deck. Now yes, I know Toby said merch isn't canon, but I feel like we can still rely on character designs pretty well, seeing as the art would need to be approved by someone on the team, probably Temmie or Toby himself. So no, we shouldn't take this design as completely canonically confirmed, but it's the most reliable thing we've got. Her art on this card very distinctly shows Undyne the Undying with black and white amorphous armor, specifically black with white outlines. Seem familiar? Come on, just look at these two. The only Undertale characters the Knight shares direct visual and behavioral connections to are characters that have been revived through the power of determination, which I've already established is very closely tied with darkness. You can probably see where I'm going with this. This brings us to the real theory part of things. The rest of this was more of an analysis. So allow me to spin you a little story. Years prior to the events of the game, teenage Azrael Dreamer and his younger sibling Chris spent all their free time playing around and exploring with the teenage December, or Des, Holiday, and her younger sister Noelle. One day, they get lost in the forest outside hometown. It's likely that it was only Chris and Des who were lost, but it doesn't make a huge difference if Noelle and Azrael are there too. And so, with nowhere else to go, they follow something that seems to be leading them, a pointed tail, likely the tail of Friend. Lost where the forest would grow, the children followed the pointed tail. The poor children! The pointed tail leads them to the shelter. Perhaps it's already open when they get there, perhaps Des knows the code, seeing as it's written inside her guitar later on, although I think it's possible that Carol hid it there herself after the fact. What happens next is almost certainly going to be revealed in a future chapter, but it's traumatic enough that Chris blocks it out of their mind, using a tree as a mental block to cover up the memory of whatever they saw. But on some level, they can't fully erase that memory, and can't fully wash their hands of what happened there. You can never wash it all away. What we do know is that it's likely Des willingly walked into the shelter. Maybe Chris shut the door behind her, maybe something else did, or maybe it shut on its own. But regardless, the door slams shut behind Des and she's trapped in the dark world within. I always did have that nightmare, walking into the darkness with the light shining from the doorway. Then the door slams shut behind me, and everything goes black. A monster can't seal a dark fountain. Even the average human might not be able to either. The only person we know can seal it is Chris using the power of the soul, our power. If Des is alone, as it seems like she is, there is no escape for her. I believe that next, Des is attacked. Maybe by Friend, maybe by Gaster, maybe by some other horror this shelter holds that we have yet to see. But I believe she is left seconds away from death. Maybe she's already dead, in fact, just not yet turned to dust. That's when the darkness is fused into her body. It could have happened naturally, just by being in the darkness of the shelter, which may actually just be the depths due to the sheer amount of Gaster associations. Could have been Gaster himself, injecting the darkness into her like Alphys did with determination into the fallen monsters. Maybe.
Darker, yet darker.
Des, the Roaring Knight, is Gaster's infamous experiment. Maybe he saw an opportunity to craft the knight he needed for his great prophecy, his Deltarune. Maybe that's why Friend lured her in with his pointed tail in the first place. But that's just a maybe, and it's not what I'm trying to claim here. What I am claiming is that Des was revived through darkness. Not in the same way that Gerson was, because he was already dust, but that her body was infused with darkness, keeping her alive in some horrible way. Presumably, the creator of this fountain had no memory of Des as she was, so her image was corrupted, like the old man in the second sanctuary. If she was intentionally made to be the knight, maybe that intention seeped into her. She becomes a shadow of the rebellious teenager she once was, with only glimpses peeking through in subconscious acts. She becomes a twisted, darkened, and powerful version of Des's body, moments away from turning into dust, like the Amalgamates. When Susie claims that the Fun Gang would beat the Knight easily in the Light World, the Knight laughs. Is this because Susie is dead wrong? Or is it perhaps out of irony, because Susie has no idea just how right she is? Honestly, I don't know. As interesting of a concept as I think the latter is, it probably isn't correct. Des is clearly alive and not completely corpse-like in the Light World, being able to open fountains, hide in various closets, and kidnap a police officer. Because of the black shard and shadow crystals, it seems to be implied that the Knight's Light World form is the same as their Dark World form. I don't know if that's possible in any way other than darkness completely taking over her body, not just transforming it within a dark world like we see with the other Lightners. Maybe she is her own little dark fountain, like the Titans are. We have yet to see a Titan in the Light World, but I think it's possible just based on the images accompanying Ralsei's description of the Roaring. It's also worth noting that so far the Knight and Titan are the only things we've seen cause actual destruction to the Light World, with Tenna in the mess that Chris and Susie leave the church. That's completely debatable though, especially because of Birdley's paralyzed arm, or coma, at the end of chapter 2. But anyway, does this mean all hope is lost for saving Des? I mean, it was pretty clear that what happened to the Amalgamates was irreversible. Well, no, I don't think so. Des wouldn't be called a lost girl, and we wouldn't be told to find her if she was just straight up dead. Clearly, some part of Des still remains, both in the Roaring Night and in whatever part of her is stuck in the code, whether it be her soul or not. Yeah, I didn't forget about that little detail that haunts Des' night theories. In the same way that reminding the Amalgamates of their past, the memories that remained muddled in some part of their minds, that could be how we save Des. Perhaps the order to find her is less literal than we all thought. Maybe, instead, it means to help the girl find herself, lost in the darkness of her mind. That could be where her soul or consciousness is trapped, not in the code, but within her own mind, drowned out by darkness as it took over the split second she died. That might even be what this little thing in the night's ribs are, Des' soul encased in pure darkness. Consider this. In our final moments against the night, instead of fighting, we will act. We'll talk about rock bands that Toriel would disapprove of, about baseball and wiffle ball, about horror movies late at night on the TV. We might have Noelle and Azriel by our side. Maybe Susie will even play the guitar. And in doing this, we'll break through the distorted, animalistic instinct of the Roaring Night. We'll remind her of who she is to the people that love her, just like how the old man was formed by that loving memory of Gerson. We'll reach through the darkness and find her, find Des. We'll be with her in the dark. And finally, using our power as the soul, we'll drive away the darkness, just as we did with the Titan, the Dark Fountains, and that nearly fatal march towards the night with Susie, Ralsei, and Chris. We'll do what Chris couldn't or didn't think to do that fateful day at the shelter. That could be why they need us. We might be the only hope to finally washing away that dark stain. Back in Undertale, at the end of its pacifist route, we proved that everyone can be saved, even Flowey, the godly antagonist, even Azriel. At the end of Deltarune, we'll find the same is true. We can save her. We will save December Holiday. Now, I don't necessarily think this theory is true. It just doesn't have enough evidence at the moment. Maybe that'll change in future chapters, but for now, there's still too many leaps, primarily in that narrative I spun at the end there. But I definitely don't think that all the determination/amalgamate and darkness parallels are unintentional, and I really do think they have something to do with whatever's going on with the Roaring Night. I mostly made this theory just to get this on the table, because it's been plaguing me for months, and maybe even get someone more qualified on the topic. I'm no half-bred chaos or spooky dude, after all. But ultimately, I don't think we should be ignoring these details. Whether or not the night is a Des-Darkness amalgamate, there's just too many similarities to write them off as coincidental, especially not after Friend and Endogeny's joint appearance in Chapter 3. Well, wait. Maybe it was Friend the whole time. Maybe Friend is Determination. The Determination extractor in the True Lab is clearly Gaster Blastery, and Friend and Gaster share so many motifs. Creepy smiling, shadow crystals, the depths, hell imagery. What if the entire reason the amalgamates exist is actually because of Friend? Because they had a friend inside? Yeah, okay, I deserve that.